Okay, so I'm just going to walk us through that continuous ball bounce animation to clear up any confusion that was going on. I know most of you got this and most of you are already all set with this project, but I'm also wanting to cover just the Arnold light rendering setup and how to export this into After Effects. So what I'm going to start doing here is basically just go through that same tutorial that I've shown in class. I'm just gonna just do a really brief recap here. So first thing I'm gonna do is create a sphere, and in the top viewport I've created that, and under my parameters I'm gonna make sure that that radius was at 10, and I'm gonna make sure that my segments is at 20. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. You'll notice if I hit the W key for the move tool that my numbers are all over the place. So I'm actually going to zero those out and hit 0, 0, and 0. And I'm actually going to go to my modify panel now and make sure that the base to pivot function is on. And you can see in the front viewport, let's see, base to pivot all set. We can see right here that now it is laying on that axis instead of it being right in that middle. So this is something I think a number of you guys were having some confusion about. So now that I have all that going on, I'm going to think about how I can export this thing using about 30 frames. Instead of the PDF that I provided for you guys, this is to make this loop, and it saves us render time. And since this action occurs over and over and over again, instead of having us render out 100 frames, rendering out about 30 frames would actually be much more efficient. So we're utilizing the post effects, or the post process of bringing it into After Effects and looping that manually by copying the frames over and over again. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to go into my front viewport, and now that I have that front viewport activated, I accidentally had the lock on. That's from hitting the space bar. Remember, that's a common mistake. What we're going to do is have set key on, and I'm going to set a key. So I should see that right there, and it is showing me 3 colors. Basically what that's showing me is that the key is being set on the X, Y, and Z axis, which we can clean up later on, but I'm going to leave that alone. Now I'm going to go to frame 15. And now that I'm at frame 15, what I'm going to do is, before I even change this, I'm going to actually make sure I'm in world. Go back, set that key again, and go to 15. So this is basically what my controls are going to be set at. I want to have this at world for this exercise. We're going to get into more of that later on in the class, but right now make sure you're in world just to prevent any of these controls from swapping on you. So now that I have that going on, I am going to bring this up on the Z-axis to about 50. So let's see what we do. We hit 50. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So what I'm going to do is hit a key there, and now I have 2 keys. I have it down and up. Now remember, the shortcut to be able to copy this frame is actually going to be selecting it, holding down Shift, and you'll notice there's an arrow showing up here. Hold down Shift and drag that, and now you've duplicated that frame. So this is good, but right now it is not exactly playing correctly. It's playing very linearly in speed, so it's not increasing or decreasing in speeds, and we're going to change that by modifying our keyframes in the curve editor. So first what I'm going to do is go to this little gear in the time configuration. My length is currently set to 100, and my end time is set to 100. What I actually want that to be is 29. And actually, we're going to leave that at 30. Okay. That's good. So, what this is doing for me is allowing for me to only see that animation occurring. Now, it is rendering and showing, or not rendering, but it's showing me the 0 frame and the 30 frame. What that's doing is it's actually giving me an additional keyframe here. So from 0 to 15 and then 15 to 30, that's actually giving me this frame 30 and 0. And when it loops, it's actually going to double the frames right here and here. So it's actually going to hang a little bit when it touches down. And when we render that out, we'll fix that. But for now, this is good. Now that I have that, what I need to do is go up to my curve editor. And so that curve editor is going to be right here. And it looks like that little tilde sign. So when I open that thing up, it could be a little bit intimidating looking. The main thing we want to look for is the position information. So the position information is right here, and you'll notice under position, if I have that selected, everything else went away, and it's giving me kind of a ghosted dotted line to tell me what is animating. I have a Z animation occurring, X, Y, and Z. The X and Y actually, if it's staying constant and it's not doing anything, what we could do is just marquee select or select and drag across all these and hit delete. It's not hurting the animation. It doesn't need to be there. The reason why, this is what we're looking for. This is the type of animation that we're actually going to use to be able to record that motion. Those other ones were stagnant, so it actually wasn't doing anything for us. And what I'm going to do now is go into the Z position and modify these. So if we look at the animation and what's going on right now, let's play that back. So if we look at those curves and how that's influencing the animation, it's kind of just going back and forth, back and forth. It doesn't seem like it's bouncing. What we're going to need to do is change the way that this animation is occurring through the curve editor. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to select one of these keys, and I'm going to change that to fast. So you'll notice there's tangents to slow, tangents to fast. I'm going to do that to the other one too, the front one. And now it's looking kind of like an arc. It's kind of looking actually more like how a bounce would visually look like. So let's look at what this does to this animation now. If I hit play, notice it's spending less time on the ground and more time in the air, as if it's escaping gravity's control a little bit, trying to, and then it's getting pulled back down, and it accelerates as it goes down and bounces back up. This is looking good. So this is how we want our curves to look for our keyframes. Now there isn't anything else applied in here, so what we have to do is just close that up. But to make this actually feel like it is a bouncy ball, what we're going to do is apply the squash and stretch technique. So to do that, we're going to go into our scale tool, but I'm going to click and hold down on that and go into this one right here. And that is select and squash. That's the one I want to use. So remember what we talked about in the history of animation, and one of the 12 principles of animation being the squash and stretch concept. What we don't want to do is start to squash this thing and have it so maybe it's doing something like this. So it's stretching like this, or maybe it's going and doing something like this for a squash and stretch. That's not maintaining the volume of the object. We need to make sure that's happening. So let's see what we do here. Let's go all the way up in the air, and that's what it should look like. That's pretty good. But when it starts to come back down, we need to think about how that would be affected. So if we think about that, when that hits the ground, it should start to squash out. So what I'm going to do is, when I am on the 0 and the 30 keyframe, I'm actually going to take the y-axis. Now that I have this, I'm not going to use the numbers down here. I'm just going to use this, and I'm going to watch for this and maybe squash that down to about 75 for the y. Now notice that number went away. The reason why is I'm in view. If I was in world and I do that, let me undo. Let's see what happens now. So I have my tool selected. I'm going to squash that. And in Z, it's staying there. That's why I wanted to have you guys use world, because you can actually see that number. If you were in view, those numbers would go away. That's not a good idea. So I like that. I'm going to have set key on there. And I'm going to set key again. And from here, I'm going to zero out my numbers and set a key for that. And now it's going from being squashed to a regular ball and then back to being squashed again. So let's play that back. Now that is starting to look good, but I think maybe 75 is actually too much. So maybe we can go and let's try this one. So instead of me, I think it was around 83 or 91. So for the Z, what I'm going to do is just click on that tool or that keyframe, hold down Shift and drag that over to, oh, what happened here? It seems to be very different than when I changed that. The reason why is I didn't have auto key on, I have select key. So you just have to remember to be in that sort of frame of mind, whatever one you're using, because auto key would have maintained that, but since I have select key, I have to remember to hit set key before I do that. So I'm gonna do that again. So maybe that's what I like. I'm gonna hit the set key button, select this, drag it over, and there we go. Now we have less of a modification to that. Now what we should think about is, as this is coming down, what's going to happen before it actually squashes? It should stretch, and that should be stretching at the maximum right before it comes into contact with that floor. So I'm actually going to do that right around frame 29. I'm going to have that go maybe up to about here, and I'm just eyeballing this. Let's set a key here, and let's see what that does now. Okay, that's starting to stretch before it hits the ground. But there's still some stuff I could tweak here. It is starting to stretch, or maybe it's not stretching fast enough for me. So I'm going to move that to around here, and let's see what that does. So instead of it going right at the very end, maybe at around 25. Now it looks really weird. It looks like it's in a state of flux or something, or it's transforming. Let's see what we do if we can move that over to 27. I'm going to keep it at 29. And I think what I'm going to do is have it not actually start to transform, so keep it as a ball for a little bit longer. So maybe at 19, I'm actually going to zero out those numbers. So 100 by 100 by 100, and by zero out, I mean just bring it back to its original squash and stretch. I'm going to hit a key. Now let's see what happens. Okay, so that's starting to look okay, but we really don't know until we start to see it in some dimensionality if this is starting to look good. Don't get accustomed to just looking at stuff through one perspective. Get in the habit of changing your viewports to make sure that we can see this from different angles. Okay. It's starting to look pretty good. Just going to check my keys again. Make sure it's selected. And I'm going to check my position on the Z. And you'll notice there's actually another keyframe that showed up. The reason why that's happening is because I have, whoop, if that happens, just drag it out again. I'm going to drag it by that little arrow over here, and there we go. This is one of my least favorite things about 3D Studio Max is the menu systems, which seem to be working against new students constantly, or people who are tired that are recording demos. So okay, let's see here. I have this animation occurring, but it seems kind of like I have something slowing down here for my position, where I want that to stay fluid, and it's actually happening twice. So that we don't want. We need this to be as constant as possible. So that's because when we added a keyframe for scale, it also keyframed the position. So we need to be aware of that. I'm just going to hit delete on that one, delete on this one. Make sure this is still maintaining that look, and I'm going to close that, and let's play it again. Okay. Now, it doesn't seem like it's doing the correct idea when it's going up. It's squashed, and then it starts to move upwards and transform back into that, or morph back into that regular ball shape. So we need to kind of make that accelerate a little bit faster. So let's see what we could do for that. If it's hitting with that much force and then bouncing up, you would expect that this shape would actually be the opposite of that. So let's see if we can swap that out. I'm actually going to use the one at 29 and drag that over, holding down shift, and make that be stretched again. And that's starting to look a lot better already. So you're no longer having this bounce back up and stay like a pancake. It's actually starting to morph back into that squashed look, which is very good. And depending on the force, the faster I think that would occur. So that's looking pretty good. So now, if this is what I want, let me scrub through. Bounce, bounce, bounce. Okay, let's add a plane. So I'm going to go Alt-W, get in the top viewport, add a plane, drag that thing out, and let's see here. We can have that with snaps toggle and drag that so it goes to the grid, turn that off, and then just scale that thing. Whoop, have squash and stretch scale on, regular scale, scale that thing up. Alright. So, now that I have something like this, let's see what we can do with having some lights in our scene. So, whoop. I forgot to end that. Let's see. Let's get that plane back in here. And snap toggle that thing here. Alright, we have that on. I didn't end the creation, that's why. Scale it. Scale it. Alright, so that's pretty good. What I'm going to do is I am going to set this up for rendering with Arnold. So if I hit render, my render looks like this. Super exciting, right? So let's make some modifications. The first thing we need to do, click on the gear with the teapot. We're going to change this from scanline renderer to Arnold. And that's what we want to make sure we do. I'm going to hit render again, and you'll notice already looks much different. So let's get some light in here too to make it look a little bit more interesting. And so what I'm going to add, not photometric, and so I'm in my creation panel. I just went to the light section and Arnold, and I have Arnold light, so I'm going to click on that and left click and drag. So now I have a light that's been created in my scene. I'm going to first grab that target and drag it to the middle of my object, and I'm going to look at it in my perspective view, bring it over and up. Okay, let's see what that's doing for us for our render. Okay, it's dark, but that is okay. We're going to adjust this in a second. Now you'll notice my viewport is different than what's being rendered. So what we need to do is, if you hit Shift and F, it's going to tell us what is the safe area, or what is actually going to be rendering for the frame. So what we need to do is stop being in traditional non-HD render settings. This is like a TV from the 90s or anything beyond that or earlier than that, and it's doing a 640 by 480. Well, that's not so great. I'm going to go to HD TV and 1280 by 720, and let's see what that did for my render. Okay. Now it's continuing rendering. That's okay. I just wanted to make sure that was framed. Now I know it's framing for my ball when it is on the ground, but what happens if I scrub through to frame 15? Oh, it's gone. So we need to make sure that we take into account action that's going to occur throughout the entire scene, and it's not just action that occurs for one specific segment. We need to make sure this is thinking about all of those ideas. So let's see, that should look better now. It's containing the animation. You want to make sure you give it some head space, some space on the bottom, so it doesn't feel like it's cramped. And that's pretty good. Now let's go to our light, and to be able to select our light, instead of me going out of this perspective I just took time to frame, I'm just going to go to the Arnold light over here and click on my modify panel. I'm going to scroll down, and let's see. There are a lot of different things that we can change. So we have color, it's white. Maybe we want that to be a little bit of a yellow, not too much. And let's see. I'm now going to go and change this type from quad to spotlight, and then I'm going to change my intensity from 1 to, let's say, maybe 8. Let's see what that does to my render. Okay, that's getting there. I'm going to close that, and I'm actually going to bring up that intensity a little bit more. Do another test. Okay, so you'll notice there's another number down here, exposure. I'm actually going to increase that if I can. Let's say around 13. Hit render. Okay, we're starting to get there. That's looking nice. I have a shadow on there. I don't like exactly where this spotlight is, so I might increase the cone on this. And to be able to do that, all we have to do is find that setting. And there's my cone angle right here. It's at 60. Watch what happens if I increase that. Okay, that's letting my more of my scene be illuminated by that spotlight, and you'll see there that is. Okay, I don't mind that. That's looking okay. I think I'm going to actually reposition the light so it's a little, that shadow's behind it. So what I'm going to do is Alt W. I don't want to change anything in there. I don't want to mess up that shot. So Alt W. I have this light, and I'm just going to move it over a little bit. And now, making sure that this is still highlighted for my viewport, I'm going to render. Okay. A little bit more. It is a good idea to test this. Now, every time I render this, it's taking a couple seconds to think. It's a good idea to reduce the size. So right now it's 1280 by 720, and I'm also rendering from top view. It's not what I wanted. I had that active, and that's why it's doing that. So I'm going to make sure I had that one selected and render that. Alright, that's looking a little bit better. So every time I render, it takes some time. And the best thing to do, instead of having to sit there and calculate, go to your render settings. And we would change this. So if I did a 320 by 180 test, it's a lot faster. Now it's small, obviously, but it's a lot easier for us to recognize some of the changes that are being made. So once you do like those changes, then you can do it into full HD or full resolution. I'm just gonna do one more thing. I think most of the settings are pretty good in here, but I do want to change the color of my shadow, maybe a little bit more reddish purple. just drag that down towards the dark and value. Maybe around there. Alright, let me do a test render on that. Of course, wrong viewport. Let's do it one more time. For some reason it's not. Remember I clicked that. There we go. Alright, so. Alright, it's subtle, but I can tell it changed just a little bit to more purple. So, that's not bad. What I'm going to do now is I could add another light. I think it's blowing out a little bit, so what I'm going to do is just test a couple more things here. One of those things I want to do is reduce that exposure just a hair. So let's see. Under color intensity, I'm going to drop that down to maybe an 11. Let's see what that does to our scene. Whoops, it rendered the front viewport. There we go. Alright, it's not blowing that out anymore, but it's still, it could be brighter. So I'm going to do that one more time, or maybe a couple more times until I get it right. So selecting that. And I am now going to adjust that so the exposure, let's see if 12 was better. Making sure I'm in that viewport, click on it before I render, and now barely noticeable for a difference. So instead of adjusting that exposure, I think I'm going to increase the intensity this time. So let me just crank that up a little bit. Make sure I have that window selected. Alright, I think I'm going to stick with that. So, how do I add a material on this so it looks like a beach ball? Well, we need to make sure we're working in physical-based shaders. That's very important when we are working with Arnold. So we need to make sure we select physical material, drag that out, double-click on that name, it'll bring us to here. I can name that to beach ball. And I am now going to change my base color. So to do that, I'm actually going to click on this box, and I'm going to type in checkerboard. So I found checkerboard, select that, hit OK. And now, if I click on that M this time, it brings me up to the settings that that checkerboard is going to show up. And I can see that being represented right here. So maybe I want it to be a yellow. Or, yeah, we'll do yellow. Oops. Let's change this one to maybe an orange, peachy orangish color. And that's going to be too close to that ground, so maybe we'll do more of a green. And then this one can be maybe like a more vibrant color like that. So now, if I start to adjust the U frequency and the V frequency, I'm going to drop this one down, see what this changes. Okay, so if I hit 0 on that, all of a sudden I just have two colors there. If I start to mess with one of these by increasing it, you'll notice I can change that to being stripes. So if I do 0, and then maybe this could be 3, all of a sudden I've got a beach ball. So I'm going to leave that alone. And to be able to get that showing up on my model, I need to make sure I put assign material to selection. Okay, but it's not showing up here. That's because we don't have our materials on. And right now, since this is an Arnold physical shader, it may not want to show us everything. So we're going to leave all that alone. But if I hit render, now I have a ball that is actually looking like a sort of a beach ball. Now, at least for color, let's see if we can change that one type of material on it by double clicking on this. And just talking about materials, it's currently in a standard material, but I could change the preset here to being all sorts of different things, and one of those is rubber. Now when I do that, unfortunately it's going to get rid of the checker. That is okay. What I could do is relink that by left clicking. Let me just make sure that goes over here. Let me zoom in so you can see what I'm talking about. So it broke that link for that, but that's okay. We can click on this and drag that over to the base color map again, and it links that back up. So it's doing that because it's looking at the type of material and it ignores the previous settings. So just to link that back up, since that checkerboard was created, we can just link that back in, and let's render this one more time to see what that changed. Okay, so it made it more like a rubber ball, which if you don't like, once again, we could just go back into the material editor, double click on this, change that preset, possibly matte plastic or glossy plastic. That probably would be more how a beach ball would behave, and click and drag this over to the base color map. And now let's hit render on that, and now it's looking a little bit more like a beach ball color. Now you'll notice this ball has this sort of a jagged look to it. That's because it was set up in low res polygon. To be able to modify that, all we would have to do is increase the amount of information that we're giving for the polygon, or the ball. And right now the segments is set to 20, so if we actually change that, let's say that maybe that's 30, let's render that, and notice that goes away. So that's because each one of these polygons faces that's being represented, if it has less resolution, it's going to be interpreted visually as jagged looking versus this right here. So that's looking pretty good. So I like this setting. So what I'm going to do now is render this whole thing out. So to render this whole thing out, what I'm going to do is go to range instead of single, and I'm going to go from 0 to 29. Now why 29 instead of 30? Well, because frame 30 is the same as frame 0. So if I end up rendering out 0 to 30, this animation is going to loop with an additional frame in there. We don't want that. So now that I have that, I'm going to go to render output and go to files, and I got to figure out where this is going to go. So I'm going to send this to my folder for renders, and this is ball bounce, and that's good. I'm going to give it a name, and I'm going to save this as PNG is fine. So now that I have this, I'm going to hit save. Oh, it forgot that I called it ball bounce because I gave it a different save as type. So now that I have this, I'm going to go 24. We don't need to be 48-bit. I'm not fancy. I'm going to hit OK. And now that I have all this, I'm just going to hit render. And it's going to do its thing. And I'm going to let that do that. And once I come back from this, you're going to see us in After Effects. Okay, so I have After Effects open, and what I'm going to do is start a new project, and this isn't going to be anything fancy. That's fine. It actually started a project that doesn't have anything in there. All I'm going to do is right click here, go import file, and I'm going to go to that folder where I rendered everything out to. Very important to know where the heck you sent your stuff to. So I have my ball bounce 000, and it notices that it's a PNG sequence. That's what I want. Make sure that's checked, and we'll hit import. Now I have it over here. All I have to do is click it, left click and drag over here, and it shows up in my timeline. Now it is currently, let me zoom out. I'm going to click on this and zoom out from here. And it is currently only doing 1 minute. So what I need to do is change my composition. So moving up to composition, composition settings, and instead of it being 1 minute, let's say it's going to be, or sorry, 1 second is what it is. It says it's 1, and I'm actually going to change that. Maybe it's going to go 10. I'm going to hit OK. And that was zooming in, so zooming out is actually the opposite way. So there we go. I'm going to take this and just drag another one in. And just make sure that these match up. So I'm going to click this and drag it so it snaps to that last one. And if you're having trouble doing that, scrub your timeline and it should snap to that last one. And move that over. And okay, there it is. Move this over to the last one. Drag it in again. Okay. Drag it in again. Okay. Drag it in again. There's a couple of different ways that we could do this. I'm just showing you the quick way. Maybe not so quick if you start to learn some hotkeys, but I'm showing you the easiest way without going too deep into After Effects here and how to get this to export. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 seconds. So let's make sure the output, alright, I think it's cutting off 1 frame. Just go to composition, composition settings. We'll tell it to go to 11 and we'll do some cleanup here. So I'm going to hit OK. And now if I zoom in, I want to make sure this was being cut off, so we don't want to have that happen. I'm going to move this all the way over to the end, and we need to make sure that our composition outputs everything. And right now that is going to 11. So this is basically just dragging across our timeline. I'm going to grab this blue area underneath that. This is our work area, and we only want to render to that last shot or that last frame. So if we hit render on this, it actually would output this to be a lot longer than we needed. Actually, almost about a second more than we needed. So you need to make sure that this is contained within these 2 blue brackets, and I'll show you what that means from here to there. So now I should be able to watch this ball bounce over and over and over again, and over and over and over again, actually 10 times. So that's what I wanted. So what do I gotta do now? I need to output this video somehow. So what I'm gonna do, hit spacebar. I'm gonna go to File, Export, and Media Encoder Q. Wait for that to pop up. Okay. It has my project listed. That's good. We need to make sure this is at H.264. So let's make sure our presets are good there. H.264 is good there. And ignore why that did that. We could actually hit minus. And now we just have that ball bounce. Let's put the output file to where we can find it. That's what this is saying right here. So we're going to click on this text right here, and we're going to go back to our file, and let's say it's under MVCC, ball bounce, save, and press the play button. And it's going to start spinning, and we'll have our video. There it goes. Okay, and now let's go see if we can find our video. Okay, so if we go into our folder, and it should be underneath my MVCC ball bounce. There's the video. I'm going to double click on that, and there it is. Now I definitely do not like my color selection there. That's not so great. I probably could have overemphasized that springiness of the ball as well. It's not really noticeable in the output. You can sort of see that really quick squash, but I should have pushed that a little bit further in my output. But that is how we would be putting this together.